Since the divorce and the court case, I have done so much to change my life. Since the divorce and the court case, everything in my life had been shaken to its core. The weight of the past few years seemed to collapse on me all at once, leaving me gasping for air, and certain of what was next. The decision to end my marriage had not come easily, nor had the aftermath. It was a drawn-out, painful process, one that involved not just emotional scars but also the legal battles that ensued. The court case was one I never imagined I'd have to face, but it had been inevitable. It was a battle for the future, for stability, for the sake of my children, and for my own peace of mind. In the months following the divorce, the heaviness of it all seemed suffocating. I was in a constant state of limbo, unsure of where I stood. The house, once a shared space full of laughter and memories, felt like a hollow shell now. Every room reminded me of what I had lost, and every silence echoed with the absence of my former life. I could feel the weight of the legal proceedings looming over me, the unfinished business still hanging in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break. There were days when I couldn't bring myself to get out of bed. I had been so focused on the details of the divorce, on making sure everything was divided, on the legal strategy, on fighting for what I thought was fair, that I had lost sight of myself. I had neglected my own needs, my own healing. For so long, I had been wrapped up in the mess of our relationship, in the push and pull of trying to make it work, that I had forgotten what it felt like to just breathe for myself. But the turning point came when I realized that nothing was going to change unless I took action. The court case had taken a toll on me, but it was also a reminder that life was moving forward whether I was ready or not. My children needed me, I needed me, and if I didn't make the choice to move forward, to pick up the pieces of my life, and start anew, then I would continue to be trapped in this cycle of grief and regret. I started small. I began by waking up every day, even when it felt impossible. I started exercising, something I had neglected for years. At first, it was just a short walk around the block, but gradually, it became something more. My body felt weaker than I remembered, but each step I took was a small victory. The endorphins helped, yes, but there was something deeper happening, something that was shifting inside of me. With every mile I ran, with every weight I lifted, I felt a little stronger, a little more capable. I was no longer just the victim of my circumstances. I was taking control of what I could. Along with the physical changes, I began to re-examine my mental state. The emotional scars of the divorce were still fresh, and the court case had brought out sides of me I didn't recognize. But I realized that I couldn't keep drowning in the past. I had to forgive myself for the mistakes I made in the relationship. I had to forgive myself for staying in a marriage that no longer served me, for not seeing the signs sooner, for allowing myself to be treated in ways that I knew deep down weren't right. The shame I felt had kept me tethered to him, even after the divorce. I carried the guilt, believing that somehow I wasn't enough, that I had failed at the most important thing in my life. But I slowly began to see that the failure wasn't mine to carry anymore. It wasn't my fault that the marriage didn't work. It wasn't my fault that I had to fight for a future that didn't include him. I sought therapy. It was a step I had resisted for so long, thinking that I could do it on my own, but I finally realized that I couldn't. I couldn't heal from this alone. I needed professional help. The first few sessions were uncomfortable. I didn't know how to talk about everything I had been through, how to express the years of pain that had built up in my chest. But over time, the words came easier. I learned that it wasn't about erasing the past, but about understanding it, accepting it, and using it to build a better future. With therapy, I began to focus on my own happiness, something I had put on the back burner for so long. I started to reclaim parts of myself I had forgotten existed. I took up hobbies I had once loved but abandoned when life became too busy, when the responsibilities of marriage and family took precedence. I started painting again. I began reading books that weren't about parenting or marriage, books that were just for me, books that allowed me to dream and escape for a while. I surrounded myself with people who uplifted me, who understood the strength it took to get through what I had. I leaned on friends who were supportive and offered comfort without judgment. I started to see that I wasn't alone in this, that others had gone through their own struggles and had come out on the other side. I also focused on my children. The divorce had been hard on them, and the court case had only added to the confusion. But I knew that if I could create stability for them, then we would all be able to heal. I made sure to spend quality time with them, to listen to their fears and their hopes. I was present, truly present, in a way I hadn't been able to be before. I showed up for them, not just physically, but emotionally, in a way that I hadn't done in the past. I learned how to parent not just from a place of duty, but from a place of love and understanding. And as they began to see me healing, they started to heal too. We created new routines, new memories, new ways of being a family, and slowly, we all began to find joy in the chaos. As the months went by, the change in me became undeniable. The once paralyzing sadness began to fade. The anger, the resentment, the bitterness, I learned how to let go of those emotions. They no longer had the power over me they once did. I found peace in knowing that I couldn't control everything, but I could control how I responded to life. I chose to let go of the negative patterns, the toxic thoughts, and the past that had held me prisoner for so long. The court case was eventually over, and though it didn't bring the closure I had hoped for, it was a relief. The weight of the legal battle lifted, and I could finally breathe without feeling like I was suffocating under the pressure of the fight. It was over, and that was all that mattered. Now, as I stand on the other side of it all, I can see the transformation. I'm not the person I was when the divorce started. I am stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I ever thought possible. I've learned that life doesn't always go as planned, and sometimes, the hardest things can lead to the most important changes. I am no longer defined by my past, by my marriage, or by my failures. I am defined by the strength it took to rebuild my life, piece by piece, and by the love I have for myself and my children. Though the journey is far from over, I now stand with hope in my heart. I know that no matter what comes next, I will continue to change, to grow, and to move forward. I have done so much to change my life, and I am proud of the person I am becoming. The journey of rebuilding myself didn't end with just finding peace in the chaos. It was more of a continuous evolution. Each day felt like another step forward, sometimes two steps forward and one step back, but progress was still progress. There were days when I felt like I had it all together, when I could look in the mirror and recognize a woman who had taken control, who had fought through the storm. Other days, I was reminded that healing wasn't linear, that I could still feel the weight of my past tugging at my shoulders, that old wounds sometimes reopened in unexpected moments. The most profound change, I realized, was not just in how I interacted with the world, but in how I began to see myself. I had spent so many years caught up in the expectations of others, what my ex-husband thought, what my family thought, what society thought a successful life should look like. But now, I was starting to understand that my worth didn't hinge on someone else's validation. I no longer needed external approval to feel okay about who I was. I had found a deeper sense of value, grounded in the simple fact that I was still here, still fighting, still working toward a life that was authentically mine. The first time I truly felt like I was thriving again was when I realized I had started to really dream about the future. I had spent so long in survival mode, focused on putting out fires and making sure the bills were paid, that I had forgotten what it felt like to want something beyond what I had. But now, the possibilities seemed endless. I started to think about things I had long put aside, things that excited me, things that brought me joy. Maybe I would go back to school, or perhaps I could start a small business with the skills I had accumulated over the years. There was a fire igniting inside me, a desire to shape my future, to make something of myself outside of my role as a mother, a wife, or an ex-wife. It was thrilling to think that I could be anything I wanted, that I could reinvent myself as I saw fit. But even as my self-worth grew, the task of co-parenting remained one of the most challenging aspects of my new life. Though the court case was behind us, the reality of sharing custody of my children with my ex-husband still lingered. It was hard not to resent him at times, especially when it felt like he could move on with his life so easily, while I was left to pick up the pieces. I didn't want to feel this way. I didn't want to carry anger or bitterness in my heart, but there were moments when it was impossible to ignore. I had to remind myself, again and again, that my children were the priority. I could be frustrated and hurt, but I had to be the bigger person. I had to continue to show up for them in ways that kept them feeling secure and loved, no matter how difficult it was to share that space with my ex. I was learning how to navigate this new, complex relationship, one that was no longer rooted in love, but in mutual respect for our children's well-being. It was a work in progress, a delicate dance of setting boundaries while still showing up as the supportive mother they needed. One of the most rewarding changes, though, was how much closer I became with my children. In the months following the divorce, when the dust had started to settle and we had found our rhythm as a family of three, I began to realize how important it was for us to create new memories together. The absence of their father was painful, but it was also an opportunity to redefine what our family looked like. We didn't need to fit the mold of what a traditional family was supposed to be. We could be a family of our own, making one that found strength in the challenges we had faced, and one that learned how to enjoy each other's company in ways we never had before. There were weekend hikes, quiet nights in with movie marathons, and spontaneous road trips to places we'd never been. Simple, small moments that were nothing like the grand, picture-perfect holidays I had once imagined, but they were full of meaning and love. It was in these moments that I started to understand the true depth of motherhood, not in the big gestures or the grand plans, but in the quiet, intimate moments of connection. My children were growing, changing, and becoming more independent, but I was learning to embrace each stage as it came. We were no longer defined by the loss of our family unit as it once existed, but by the love and support we gave each other through the changes. As time passed, the wounds of the divorce healed, not because they were forgotten, but because I had learned to accept them as part of my story, not the entirety of it. I had taken what was once a painful chapter and turned it into a catalyst for growth, and while the scars would always remain, they no longer controlled my life. I had reclaimed my narrative, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my strength. I knew there would still be challenges ahead. Life had a way of throwing curveballs when least expected. There would be days when the loneliness crept back in, when the weight of raising children alone would feel too heavy. But I had also come to understand that strength wasn't about being perfect or invincible. It was about being able to pick myself up when I fell, to keep going even when things seemed impossible. I had done it before, and I could do it again. In the end, I had become someone new, not just the woman I was in the marriage, not just the woman defined by her children, but a woman who had fought for herself, for her future, and for the life she deserved. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. As the months went by, the sense of transformation became even more evident. The woman who had once felt lost and overwhelmed by the weight of her past was now emerging stronger and more confident. The journey of healing and self-discovery wasn't easy, and there were days when I doubted myself, but the progress was undeniable. I had started to build a life that was truly mine, a life that wasn't defined by my past, by my failures, or by anyone else's expectations. It was a life rooted in my own choices, my own growth, and my own happiness. I no longer felt like I was just existing. I was actively creating the person I wanted to be. I could see the change in my reflection when I looked in the mirror. My posture was different. My eyes were clearer. My smile, though sometimes tentative, was real. Work, too, became a pivotal part of my reinvention. After years of putting my own ambitions on hold to focus on my marriage and family, I was finally ready to pursue a career. I had started small, taking on freelance projects in areas I had always been passionate about. Slowly, I built my confidence. It wasn't about rushing into a high-powered job or a career that would make a statement. It was about doing work that brought me fulfillment, that challenged me, and that allowed me to prove to myself that I was capable of more than I had ever thought possible. Every project I completed, every task I excelled at, felt like another brick being laid down in the foundation of a new life. The financial independence, though modest at first, became a symbol of my self-sufficiency and resilience. My social life also began to blossom. At first, I had withdrawn from social gatherings, too wrapped up in my own internal turmoil to be present for others. But as I healed, I started to reconnect with old friends and make new ones. I learned to enjoy the company of people who were supportive and uplifting, those who saw me for who I was becoming, not just as a divorced woman, but as a whole, complex person. I found solace in laughter, in shared stories, and in the simple joy of being around others who made me feel seen and heard. I stopped hiding my true self, stopped pretending to be okay when I wasn't. It felt freeing to be authentic, to embrace vulnerability without the fear of being judged or misunderstood. As for dating, that was a more complicated process. I had spent so many years in a marriage that had drained me emotionally, and the thought of starting something new seemed both exciting and terrifying. I wasn't sure if I was ready to open myself up to someone else, to allow myself to be vulnerable in the way that love required. But when I was ready, I took small steps, testing the waters without diving headfirst into anything too serious. The process of getting to know someone again, of exploring the possibility of connection, was a new experience for me. I was no longer seeking validation or someone to complete me. I had come to understand that I was already complete on my own. Though I didn't rush into a new relationship, I found that the idea of love no longer felt like a distant, unreachable dream. It was more like a quiet, steady presence, something that could unfold at its own pace, when the time was right. It didn't have to be defined by the past or any of the mistakes I had made. Love could be something fresh, something that had the potential to be beautiful and real, without the baggage of what had come before. Throughout all of this, I remained focused on my children. They were my center, my constant. Raising them, guiding them through this new chapter of our lives, was the most important thing I could do. And as they grew, I could see them thriving as well. They had adapted to the changes with resilience, and I couldn't help but be proud of the young people they were becoming. I knew that I was doing my best to give them a stable, loving environment, one where they could feel safe and supported no matter what. I wasn't perfect, but I was committed to showing them what strength, love, and self-respect looked like. The most profound shift, though, was the way I had come to see myself. I was no longer the person who had stayed in an unhealthy relationship for too long, nor was I the woman defined by her divorce. I was a woman who had faced challenges, who had stumbled, but had also picked herself up and found the strength to move forward. I was a woman who had chosen to rewrite her story, who had embraced the difficult parts of her past while moving toward a brighter future. Looking ahead, I knew that life would continue to throw challenges my way. There would be moments when the old feelings of doubt and fear would resurface, but I also knew that I had the tools to handle them. I had learned to trust myself, to believe in my own strength. I was no longer a prisoner of my past, but a creator of my future. And with every new day, every small victory, I could feel the life I was building growing stronger. A life that was uniquely mine, full of hope, of love, and of possibilities I never thought I would reach. I had done so much to change my life, and though the journey was far from over, I finally felt ready to embrace whatever came next. As the days went on, I began to see how far I had truly come. There were moments when I would find myself thinking back to the darkest times, the days when I felt so utterly lost, unsure of how I would get through the next hour, let alone the next year. But looking at myself now, I knew that I had survived. I had found a way to rise from the rubble, to rebuild in ways that were not just about survival but about thriving. It wasn't perfection, but it was progress. I began to notice subtle changes in how others saw me too. My friends and family commented on how much lighter I seemed, how much more confident I was in myself. At first, I thought they were just being kind. After all, it had only been a few months since the finality of the divorce and the emotional upheaval that came with it. But when I saw the genuine admiration in their eyes, I realized they were right. I had transformed, my relationships had deepened as well. The friends who had stuck by me through the hardest times became closer, their loyalty grounding me. I made it a point to be there for them, too, offering support when they needed it, just as they had done for me. I started to give more of myself, without the fear of being drained or taken advantage of. I had learned the balance between giving and receiving, something that had been missing for so long, but perhaps the most significant shift was the way I viewed my own self-worth. I no longer felt like a failure. I wasn't broken. I wasn't the sum of my mistakes or my past relationships. I had come to understand that true worth wasn't something anyone else could give me, it was something I had to cultivate in myself. I was proud of how far I had come, and I knew I had the power to shape whatever came next. Still, there were moments of doubt. Sometimes, when I woke up, I would feel that familiar pang of anxiety, a reminder of how far I still had to go. There were mornings when I wondered if I was enough to make my dreams come true, enough to raise my children well, enough to create a future that felt fulfilling. But those moments were fleeting. The more I practiced gratitude, the more I focused on the small victories, the easier it became to silence those doubts. I had learned that I didn't need to have everything figured out, that it was okay to take things one step at a time. In the quiet of the evening, when my children were asleep, I would often find myself reflecting on how different my life was from just a year ago. The woman who had been broken, who had questioned her own value, had transformed into someone who was stronger, more self-assured. I had learned to trust my instincts, to listen to my inner voice that told me I was capable, I was worthy, and I was enough. One of the most important lessons I had learned was how to love myself again. For so long, I had relied on external validation, on my marriage, on the opinions of others to feel good about who I was. But in the quiet moments of self-reflection, I began to realize that I didn't need anyone else's approval to feel complete. I was enough, just as I was. I had found peace in my own company, a sense of contentment that didn't come from having everything I thought I needed, but from appreciating everything I already had. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of it. I knew there would be challenges ahead. Life wasn't suddenly going to be perfect. But now, I had the tools to face whatever came my way. I had learned to rise from the ashes, to dust myself off, and to keep moving forward with grace and resilience. And so, I continued, one day at a time. There was no rush, no deadline. No need to meet anyone else's expectations. The only thing that mattered now was that I was living my truth, that I was building a life based on who I truly was, not who I had been, or who others wanted me to be, but the person I was becoming. The woman who had once felt like a victim of her circumstances had become a woman of strength, a woman who would face the future with confidence and hope. The road ahead was long, and there would always be more to learn, more to do, and more to grow through.